All right. Welcome to Living in the Past, where two middle-aged dudes relive their past by enjoying the pop culture of their youth. In this episode, we're exploring the wonderful 1979 sci-fi horror film Alien. Although my guest might disagree with that tag, sci-fi horror. We'll talk about that in just a minute. I couldn't do this without his help, and I need Jeff here. So Jeff, welcome. It's so good to have you back this week for this episode.
Thanks so much. It is nice to be back. I had a lot of fun last time with the Friday the 13th.
It was a blast.
What a great way to relive your childhood.
So for those listening, if you missed last episode, we did Friday the 13th part 1 and 2. It's October. We're doing scary movies. We are doing Alien. My goodness. So like even before we went on air, we were talking about sci-fi horror. No, I don't think it is. So let's just talk first about our relationship with this film. Like, what is your relationship like with Alien? When did you first see it? Like, did you love it? How did you respond to it?
Well, preteen, sleepover. So it wasn't just me and a friend. This was like a ton of little boys all hanging out, and it scared the crap out of us.
Yes, it's a scary one.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where it scared us to death, but it was like, oh, this is the best thing. I guess the big takeaway looking back is when I first saw it as summer sleepover is how horrible those boomers parented back during our childhood.
It's crazy. I was very, very young when I saw it. I saw it on videotape at a friend's house, early-ish 80s. I don't know when. Yep. I was probably 8 or 9.
Same.
And it wrecked me. But I remember before I had seen it, like a friend narrating the movie to me, which was very common in that time period when you don't have the internet. It's like word of mouth. And I had a neighbor friend at school, and his name was Chris Ernst, and Chris just told me the whole story, and I was riveted. And it's amazing how I have so many memories of those moments where, have you seen this? No. Well, let me tell you what all happened. And you just have this desire to see it too.
And it was a domino effect. So it'd be like, oh, this happened in this movie. And then you'd say, well, have you seen this one?
Yeah.
And they'd be like, oh, no. Well, it's something similar happened. Here we go. And it was that sitting around the fire, around the hearth, telling stories, although it was usually the backyard.
Right.
Or at the end of the day, you played football all day during the summer and everybody's laying around tired. And then all of a sudden this comes up and you start talking. Such beautiful memories of sharing stories.
It's really interesting. I came across, I don't have it. Do I have it with me right now? I didn't highlight it. Anyways, I was reading Robert McGee's book, Story. He talks about screenwriting and storytelling. But his whole point was like when a society stops telling good stories, it's a sign of decay, like societal decay.
Campbell would agree.
Yeah, if you can no longer tell good stories to one another, like something is wrong. And it's interesting because I teach film, and my students are trying to tell stories, right? And so there's always these conversations going on in my class, and I have noticed a challenge for my students. It's hard to tell a good story, period, but it seems different from even 10, 15 years ago, just the ability to tell a good story. We rely on certain things to tell stories, and I think if we took them away, it's really interesting just to see some of the dynamics right now and the challenges young people face in trying to tell stories. Of course, I think some people might make arguments that no one's telling good stories anymore.
Well, I think that I don't know if I would agree with that argument.
Yeah.
I would say that as we look, especially at film, as we've been looking at it, and we've talked about this, how you see less and less of those franchise kind of storytellers where they're this wide breadth of film that they can, kind of pull out of a certain storyline. I would say that every story has been told. There's nothing new under the sun.
Yes.
But I would say that when it comes to our kids, and you can argue with me on this, I would say that they're more apt to wait to be told a story rather than tell a story.
Interesting.
There's so much media out there.
Yeah.
It's in their face every day.
Yeah.
I want a 30-second story on TikTok, or I want a long form on YouTube, or whatever.
Well, one of the things I'm noticing is that when a kid that I'm working with, so I work with juniors and seniors, and when they're trying to tell a story about something that they've witnessed or something that's happened, they bring in a visual aid, the phone or the iPad or the laptop, and they're like, no, see, this is what happened. I don't have to tell you. This will tell you.
Exactly.
And so those are some challenges. That doesn't mean you can't tell good stories. It's just, it feels different than it once was, where, when I started teaching, kids would just tell each other stories. Yeah. And this was right before everyone had a phone, so it's fascinating.
Is it the same argument that our parents made when radio became a thing, or when TV became a thing?
I think so. I think it's this repetitive kind of cyclical.
Okay.
That's my guess. I don't know for sure. So listeners, please let us know what you think. We would love to hear hear your thoughts. When I saw Alien, I was deeply disturbed. Mm-hmm. Of course, some of the imagery didn't make sense to me that it does now as I'm an adult and I'm able to process some things a little bit better than I did when I was 8 or 9.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my, yeah. It's a little shocking, but I was so disturbed, but at the same time engrossed. There was mystery in Alien that didn't get solved for years, maybe until Prometheus, where you find out what the space jockey is and all that. So there was a lot of mystery with the film. I really, really liked Ripley. I just, one of my favorite all-time heroes in a story.
Why were you drawn to Ripley?
For all the reasons why I like characters like Indiana Jones. And there's a strength to her. There's a moment where she tells Parker, "Will you shut up?" and just takes control of the situation. And I'm like, she's a leader, but she has an ethic that I think she sort of discovers on her own in the process. Maybe she doesn't discover. I don't know if she knows she has it until it happens. Like, oh, I have ethics, and I have a kind of a moral center where some other people don't. At least that's how I couldn't say that when I was a kid,
right? But
those were what was drawing me to Ripley.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about Ripley, we're talking about a written character, and I think that she was written that way purposefully.
Right.
I think that when you say she discovered it, I think we were discovering it with her, and it was laid out that way for us. And we can talk about that more as we dig into the what we see in the underpinning. But I think I agree 100% that Ripley you're drawn to her.
Yeah.
Not only because, for me, being a skinny little kid, it was because these big, strong, brawny men around her are all getting
taken out.
Yeah, and she's thinking.
Yeah.
So she's solving these challenges that she comes up against with her brain, as well as she used her brawn as well.
Right.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah, and all the characters are really memorable to me, at least. When I was a kid, I could remember these 7 people.
Yep.
And they were, and I know that the actors and actresses, I've watched some documentaries on the film, they would argue it's really just about the alien. But I thought their performances were so good that I can remember them. They did enough work where I can remember who they were, what they were like. There was enough work done as actors and actresses where, I know you guys. You're all defined instead of some horror movies.
They're just two-dimensional.
Yeah, some of the Friday the 13th movies, it's wait, who was that? Wait, what was that person's name?
They get named by the way they die instead of by their actual name.
Yeah, so Alien came about in a really interesting way. There was kind of a little group of filmmakers at USC. John Carpenter was one of them, and they all kind of got together and made a film called Dark Star. It was a student film at first. I think it was around 50 minutes. It was really inventive, and one of them, I think it might have been Dan O'Brien that said this, but he said it was probably the greatest student film ever made. But then we got it greenlit to be a studio film, and it's probably the worst studio film ever made. But those guys there were elements in that movie of alien on a ship seems run down. All these elements were there that later get they get sent over to this alien story. And John Carpenter, man, like had nothing to do with Alien, but he was collaborating, working with these guys. I heard a podcaster say recently that Carpenter might be the most ripped off guy in Hollywood. So many of his stories have been ripped off and retold and all that, repackaged. But Carpenter, I love the 70s because you have little groups like this. You have, a little bit earlier, you have Lucas and Spielberg and like all these guys coming together, and there's these USC connections, and they're making these great films. Well, here's a little group collaborating together on this student film that starts to have ideas that they later take over to Alien.
That's
fascinating.
Incredible. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So there's a script written. Walter Hill, who had made a lot of action movies, very famous. He made The Warriors, which it came out the same year as Alien. But Walter Hill had done enough where he had clout in Hollywood. Well, he got a hold of the script and he did a big rewrite. O'Brien, who was one of the writers originally, says it wasn't that great, but what they added one thing. Walter Hill added one thing that I will forever be grateful for. This is coming from O'Bannon. And O'Bannon said the one thing added was Ash as an android.
So fantastic.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. So bounces around, finally gets funding. Hill was going to direct. He falls out of contention to be a director. He has another project he needs to work on. And they offer it to Ridley Scott, who had just he was in like advertising and in England, and he had done some other stuff, but he only made one feature film, The Duelists. I liked that movie, but I never in a million years would have thought the guy that made The Duelists could be the guy that would make Alien or Blade Runner or Legend or like a lot of these sci-fi movies that we love. In fact, Ridley Scott would say before he started filming Alien, he's not a big fan of sci-fi or horror or anything like that, but here he is, probably one of our greatest science fiction directors ever. So
that's an amazing. I had no idea.
Yeah. And,
see, I'm learning stuff.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm here for, man.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ridley Scott comes on board. They make this film, huge success. I want to talk about Scott for a minute.
Okay.
It's weird. It's weird for me, Jeff, because like I've watched his movies. Some I liked instantly. He is one of the few filmmakers, Carpenter's this way too, I guess, but he's one of the few filmmakers where I'll see his film like 10, 15 years later. I'm like, oh, crap, I missed a classic and didn't realize it.
Okay.
And I think Alien, that happened with Alien. Like, we'll get to like critical reviews in a little bit. Like, people are just kind of like, eh.
Yeah.
And now it's like top 5 best science fiction films ever, and so Ridley Scott has made some pretty big movies that have affected the culture.
Yeah.
Where are you at with Ridley Scott? Do you like him as a director? Like, are there certain films that really struck you? Like, what are your feelings on him?
Yeah.
As a
Well,
filmmaker?
I mean, I think that we were talking again earlier. Yeah. I think that when you look at that idea of right out of the gate, Alien, Blade Runner, Legend.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
that's
just
crazy.
Like, that knockout punch after knockout punch.
Yeah.
It's not like jab, jab, jab. It's just like, I'm laying you out. I also think that Thelma and Louise, incredible. Yeah. I think there's a lot of connection between Alien and Thelma and Louise that a lot of people don't recognize.
I can't wait to talk about this.
Okay. Yeah. But also just social commentary in general, the way he weaves it into his storytelling is, I mean, there's a few directors that do it, but he's probably top of the peak in my thinking. And then there's Hannibal, which I think standalone, one of my favorite adaptations. And I think it's more of an interpretation than an adaptation because when you read the novel, it's just so deep.
Right.
But the way he tells that story, just
The Martian, like
The Martian, amazing.
Yeah. I saw a movie of his called Kingdom of Heaven in the theater. And I was I was like, okay, yeah, that's good. Had some good moments. I had a buddy of mine, and he said, Jeremy, the DVDs just came out and there is a director's cut. Did you know this? And I was like, no, I didn't. And I grabbed the director's cut. It is one of his 2 or 3 best movies.
I'll have to get it.
It is, and for those listening, if you've never seen the director's cut of Kingdom of Heaven, it is unbelievable. Okay. And it's so different than the theatrical cut. So if you saw it in the theater, just throw that opinion out the window. Go watch this director's cut. It's phenomenal. There's themes in it of, gosh, that are so, man, it's with what's going on in our world right now, in Gaza and Israel, the themes in Kingdom of Heaven are so appropriate to address. Like it's unbelievable.
Okay.
Talking about Muslims and Christians and Jews and like trying to coexist together, and people don't want that to happen. And it's pretty amazing work that I think was made almost 20 years ago, and it's still like has themes that are
relevant to today.
Yeah. So critics, it's interesting. There's a lot of mixed reviews. One British critic in The Guardian wrote, "There's not enough writing for proper characterization in the film Alien, not enough plot development for the mind as well as the senses to bite on, but for sheer theatrics, if one can apply that word to the cinema without insulting it, Alien is difficult to beat even without that substance, which might just have put it up there with the great movies of the genre." And so people are wanting it, and that sentiment is fascinating because so many critics were saying things like that. Yeah. They were saying, "That's pretty good, not great." There's comments like it's a horrid film, which could be good, skillful and studied in its nastiness. New York Times declared in their review, with a big yawn, that Alien, the sets in Alien and special effects are well done, but these things no longer surprise or tantalize us as they once did. I thought the sets were unbelievable.
Oh my goodness.
Leonard Maltin, this is funny because Leonard Maltin, he really was dismissive of the film. He talked about its stomach-churning violence, slime, and shocks, but we talked about this kind of stuff in our last episode. There was this big pushback of violence and grossness and like we need to be pure as a culture.
Yep.
Maltin later in life did a second review, and it was a glowing review of Alien. So it's so funny. He probably had a new book that he wanted to release and change things up. Another reviewer for The Guardian noted that Alien was a cruel, heartless, and essentially exploitative opus. Interesting.
It feels like, again, we're talking of its time, but it feels like they're missing a lot of the point.
Right. It seems that way.
I mean, it does take, Alien does take as read that the viewer understands some of the symbolism and all of that goes along in there. And I know that, so I know it's a sci-fi horror thing, but it's a thinking person's film. You really have to dig in to go. I'm going to jump in real quick. Is that okay?
Do it.
Okay. So from the very opening, you see that it's Nostromo, right? Which is a Conrad novel about the white savior who is overcome by the native.
Right.
And generally up until that point, ships are female. So we have this male ship, and then you have this female mother AI that's flying it. Immediately it's flipping common idea on its head.
Right.
I mean, it starts that way. This is just the opening credits. You're like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And
I think Nostromo means like shipmate or
it does.
Like something like that, and it's Italian, right? Yep. Like I can't quite remember. Yeah.
Conrad wrote all of those lovely white savior novels.
Yeah, and here's the thing, there were these. One comment, one of the reviewers said, "There's not enough writing for proper characterization." I just so disagree with that. And not only that, the imagery is speaking to us. Like the way the camera, where it's placed, the movement of the camera, the set design is so superior to a lot of films. Yep. Definitely at that time, but even today, it's just...
It holds up.
It totally holds. It's kind of amazing.
It holds up. And Geiger is a big part of that.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts about the design? Because it's obviously effective to us, and Geiger is such a big part of that. And for those of you that are like, wait, who's Geiger? Geiger was this like Swiss artist, and he had a piece called the Necronome 4, and it was basically what becomes the alien, but it is truly, his designs are just absolutely disturbing.
100%.
But kind of, I don't know if I should say this, they're kind of beautiful too. Like there's a beauty to it. And
very, very hedonistic beauty though.
Yeah, it taps into something that makes you deeply uncomfortable. And so what are your thoughts? Those are mine. Like I feel uncomfortable. Like how do you, because it's obviously blowing people's minds, the design of the alien, the design of all these ships, the interiors. What are some of your thoughts?
I think the juxtaposition of the alien ship to the Nostromo is part of what makes this film so disconcerting. I think that you look at the virile masculinity of and it's also alien. So at the same time, you're like, wait, because there's all the phallic symbols.
Yeah.
I mean, even when you think about, when they go into the ship, initially the alien ship, and they're looking at the space jockey, he's sitting in front of this huge
phallic symbol. Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, this is masculine. Whereas how does the film open?
Right.
It opens with the door opening into this birthing, they're waking up, and all of a sudden the humanity is this very effeminate kind of sterile thing. And so automatically you're just like, wait, something's off.
Something is, the way I think of things is now skewed because of what this movie's showing.
So many doors.
Yeah.
So many doors.
So
and
many.
They're all shaped in a certain way. So your brain's just going, oh, this is birth.
And I don't even know, like, even when I was younger, teenager, watching it for the 15th time, and like, I knew something's not right here. Yeah. Something's off. Like the imagery is disturbing. What is it? And it wasn't until I got probably in late teens and 20s, and I'm like, I see what's going on.
Yep.
Like I get it now. So I think there's so much to dive in. Let's take a break, and when we come back, I think there are 3 really big questions that we can address of the movie Alien. We'll be right back and starting 3 big questions.
3 big questions. Three, 2, 1.
Oh man! So I'm excited to dive into this. I don't fully know if I have the answers. So to these questions, sometimes you'll ask a question, especially as an educator, you kind of know where you're steering the ship. With this stuff, I'm not sure I have it all figured out, and I think that shows some of the beautiful complexity of Alien. So my first question that I want us to think through, and listeners, please chime in, let us know what you think. But is Alien a feminist film? If it's not, is it a step in the right direction? If it is, why is it a feminist film? I'm not fully there, but I want to hear what you think, Jeff.
Oh, it is a feminist film. Again, let's start at the open. When we see Nostromo, and instead of the Star Wars straight lines and cylindrical vehicles, we have this building that has, just to be blunt, basically breasts on the bottom.
Yeah.
So we see this, it begins that way, and throughout the whole film, one of the major themes that I see in it, and again, this is just me, is that idea of the fear of being subjugated. And it's really a poke, I feel, at the patriarchy of the time.
Yeah.
And it holds out through, like I said, it still holds up. We're still fighting those kind of battles, at least not fighting them. We're discussing those important big ideas. So when you look at it, this is about the script being flipped on the patriarchy. So all the men, it's like improper penetration for death, whether it's being having that shoved down your throat so that you become the male becomes pregnant and has this bloody, gory birth, if you will, to being caught unaware from behind. I mean, I could go deep. I don't want to make it too much here, but every single one of these deaths are an allegory, if you look at them, to the male now being the one who is being subjugated.
Right.
Whereas you look at Ripley, and she, on the other hand, is this shining knight of a woman who is using her brain. She's following protocols. No, we can't let you in. Who lets them in? The male allows. And so I think that there's a lot of conversation that was going around at that time, especially around like IVF and cloning and all of these things where the question became, is this sacred process of being born, birthing, is that sacredness being taken away and turned into this kind of sterile, stagnant thing?
Interesting. Yeah.
And I think there's a commentary there, because every time you see the humans coming out of their, it's very sterile. It's very white. It's all that. And then when you see these alien versions of birth, it's blood splattered across people's faces. Yeah. It's Lambert screaming. Yeah. It's, it's this very much more visceral, masculine, if you will, violent kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. So we have different waves of feminism, right? So this would fall into what a lot of scholars of the different feminist waves, they would say this is the second wave. First wave, I think, was mainly dealing with like suffrage and
right to vote.
Yeah, right to vote. The second wave, and a great way to define it, I wrote it down here on our notes. It basically started to broaden its view, not just voting rights, but it was talking about sexuality, family, the workplace, like right to work, reproductive rights. It really gets moving with Roe v. Wade. So you start to see, the second wave feminism. And so Alien is boom, right in that. Third wave is sort of like Gen Xers kind of like started pushing the third wave like in the 90s.
Different animal.
Yeah, it's a different thing. So we're in the second wave feminism. So when we talk about feminism, I'm kind of thinking of it as a feminist film during the second wave. I'm not really defining it how people might define it right this second.
Right. And so when I look at that, the idea that it opens up and you see this equality among the people of color, male, female, gender equality. So there's none of this conversation between the crew. And when you look at it, there's obviously women who are, above men in the hierarchy.
Right.
And they're, when you look at how people of color are engaging in this, they definitely do not feel at all. I imagine if you were to go back during that time, you would not see someone who was African American talking to very rarely to their boss in the way that are we going to get a full share? And no shame, no nothing. And I think that that's beautiful that they were saying, "Oh, this is the future."
Right. Yeah. There is Alien's fascinating because you do have this like the higher echelon of the crew, and then the lower. You have the truckers, the guys that are down in the belly of the ship, right? And so you have that going on, but there is an open channel of communication.
They sit at the same table to eat.
They sit at the same table to eat. They laugh together. Before things go super sideways, there's camaraderie, there's engagement. But when you bring the corporation in, things get really. When you bring in Weyland-Yutani, this corporation that's trying to drive things to a certain, it opens a whole other door of conversation, which I think is super applicable to today.
But then as well, because they're still talking about cycles, or if however you want to look at it, embedded impression, or what's the word I'm looking for? Oppression that is built into the system.
Right.
Systemic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the company.
Right.
Well, I mean, the company and one of the characters, which we want to talk about later.
Yes, we do want to talk about him. I would agree with a lot of what you're saying about this film being feminist. Okay. I think you still run into some problems where Ripley at the end, where she's like, the way the camera views her at the very end, it's like, yeah, the male gaze is still present, right? Ridley Scott is the guy that's working with a cinematographer to film this. And there was this, I was like, dang it. Like when I was watching it recently, not this past time for this show, but, a few years ago, there was kind of like this, we were so close to not objectifying a woman, because up to that, you didn't need that for that character, where she's getting in the undressing at the end, and it's just like, no, I don't want this. Like, but that's just me talking. I think I would love to hear what female feminists think about the end. I have read some things where they are like, yes, up to that point we're good, and then that point I'm troubled by what I'm seeing.
Yeah, but there's also the argument to be made, though, that in that moment, this is the stripping down of also this heroine is not male.
Right.
And so in this moment, that last attack
That's a good point, yeah.
She, in her femininity alone, figures out with her brain
how to kill,
how to
eliminate
the masculine.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yes, I agree.
Right.
It's obviously done because there were people who wanted to see Sigourney Weaver naked.
Yeah.
I get that. And so that, sex sells. So I get that. But there's also the argument to be made that, no, that could be viewed as purposeful to say, no, look, even in just this, place where there's no, there's no exoskeleton, there's no flamethrowers, there's none of that.
And she's also at her most vulnerable, and she wins.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
The feminine, she's embodying the feminine there. Wins.
Yeah. No, I
don't know. Maybe. Again, this is just, sorry.
It's just two dudes talking about feminism.
How often do we get to chat about this?
Oh my gosh. So on my rewatch for the millionth time last night, I just said, I think I need to ask this question. And is it fair to say, and this is question number 2, is it fair to say an important theme in Alien is focused on the horror of sexual violence? And so bear with me. This is from Cinephilia and Beyond. If you guys don't know what Cinephilia and Beyond is, it's a website that might be the best that I have found film website that does a deep dive into whatever movie they're covering. They have incredible writers. They bring in multiple sources for just one article. My film students discovered Cinephilia and Beyond, and I've tried to tell them, don't just go there, because they can almost get all the research done. The website's so great.
Oh, that's cool.
So for those listening, Cinephilia and Beyond, they just had an article come out on RoboCop that is talking about how RoboCop is an American version of Jesus Christ, and it is unbelievable. So anyways, fascinating stuff. So Cinephilia and Beyond about Alien, they're talking about this, like, the sexual violence or the sexual imagery. The search for the craft is rigorously uncanny in Sigmund Freud's sense, that what seems the most dreadful and unfamiliar leads back to what is most homely, the mother's womb. The sexualized architecture of the ship was consciously constructed that way, and they let Geiger, this designer, have free play with the design of the interiors, vaginal openings into the derelict craft. It goes on, and it talks about what we just talked about, the phallic symbol with the space jockey there, and this phallic gun. But then you have that alien ship design. You have the face hugger raping John Hurt's character Kane.
Yeah.
So there, and we talked about that earlier, this violent rape. You have Ash, if you remember, where it's revealed that Ash is a android. In the most terrifying scene for me personally, he takes a magazine and rolls it up and forces it down the throat of Ripley. It just screams of sexual violence. Veronica Cartwright's character, this is one that I didn't pick up on until maybe my mid-20s. I'm like, I can't believe I missed this. And it's when the alien kills Lambert, Veronica Cartwright's character. You might remember he puts his tail between her legs. She has her pants on. when Ripley finds the body later, you see her bare legs.
Yeah.
And so it's inferred of like some like violation has happened, and it's just disturbing.
It is.
And so I just on this rewatch, I was like, wow, there's so much imagery there to suggest, and it's horrible. And it taps into this deep horror I think people have of just like that type of violence being done to them. Am I on the right track or am I off? Like, what do you think?
I think that your first question ties into the second question, because this film, is built to scare the audience. And the audience that I think it's built to scare the most is that middle-class, white male. Right. Because it's saying everything, and what's the scariest thing in this? Right. It's that violation. Right. And so, look at, this is what happens. And I mean, sure, it happens to Lambert, but it happens to all the men first. Right. And Lambert kind of embodies the feminine that freaks out and doesn't have those positive character traits that Ripley has, where she's like cool under pressure and continues. And so then what happens? The same thing. Yeah. I think it's actually tied together. I mean, arguably, I think it's tied together. I think that your questions are really good. I think, and when I've talked to, I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but like a lot of the men that I've talked to, that like they haven't said it in so many ways, but they're deeply disturbed by it. Women, of course, it's scary, but like I don't know if they react the same way. I mean, I watched the director's cut last night, and it's I think 2003 it was released, and there's a scene that wasn't in the theatrical. And I don't know, listeners, if you've even seen this director's cut, but basically Ripley goes down. It's a famous deleted scene for a while. At the end, where Ripley is trying to escape and get on the shuttle to escape, she finds Dallas, and he is cocooned up. And you might remember in Aliens, where the Marines find all the colonists cocooned up. Oh, yeah. And one of them wakes up, and they go, "We have a live one here." And the woman's like, "Please kill me." You know, it's very disturbing. Dallas says this in this director's cut, where he's like, "Kill me." And it's like the alien, it seems like it's disgusting, but it's almost like it could be one of two things. I heard one person that worked on the film say he's just food for later. Another one said, though, that worked on the film, said he's turning him into an egg. Oh. And so I'm like, what? Because the actual egg imagery is forming around Dallas. And so you even have that, and Brett's in there as well, who gets taken out earlier. He gets grabbed and pulled up into like. But it plays. Mm-hmm. No, it does, because I would say when I'm looking at the themes, that one of them, that the idea of that subjugation, that idea is not just being put under, but being transformed into the thing that you are. It's deeply men are losing all their power, and to the point where they're just like, "Go ahead and kill me." And Ripley uses the blowtorch and torches them. Interesting. Yeah, and so you can see that scene. It's about a 2.5 minute scene right before Ripley gets on the shuttle. It's when the self-destruct. So if you guys remember the end of the film, like they set the self-destruct, the alien, and it's a 10-minute countdown. They have 5 minutes to turn it off. Right. And so, you have Parker and you have Veronica Cartwright's character. I get lost to her Lambert. They're in there getting fuel and stuff ready, right? And the alien gets them. Right. Ripley is on her way, hears them die, then she runs into the alien, leaves Jonesy on the floor, runs back to turn off the self-destruct. It doesn't work, so she goes back, and when she's going back, that's when she bumps into Dallas and kills him, and then gets on the ship, even though it was going to blow up anyway. So it's really weird, but she finds Dallas, and you have that sequence, and that's one of the reasons why they cut it. It wasn't making sense in the narrative. But the director's cut, it was going to blow up anyways. He was going to die. Why'd she spend the time to burn him up? The whole ship's going to blow up. Yeah. So that's interesting. But this idea of stripping the power away from men violently with sexual violent
imagery in some cases.
Yeah.
Although some of that violence is done to women as well. It just taps into something I think all of us, no matter what our gender is, we're just deeply disturbed by.
Well, and I don't know if we want to go here at all. I'll bring it up. You can shoot me down if you want to. But that idea also of it's definitely, I would say, a feminist film. But it also brings up the imagery of the alien. Starts off with the little squiggly worm that's kind of a white color. And then it changes into this big, dark being.
Yeah.
And when we see that, but then we also see in the next few years Predator come out, which I would say even more so. I mean, it's exploitative in the imagery it does with the dreadlocks and everything. But it also speaks to that civil rights movement of the time. And so we have not only this gender thing, but we also have this thing with ethnicity going on, you might argue. And so I find it both interesting, but in both senses, being subjugated or being absorbed into the new norm.
Right.
Which, for those in power, hugely fearful thing.
Yeah, and it's fascinating when you start digging into these things in Alien. As much as I love Aliens, I don't know if all the same types of themes are there. Some of them are, and some gender stuff's going on, but Alien has a depth to it that I don't think Aliens does. But that doesn't mean Aliens is not a good film. It's a great film.
But I think it was monopolizing on the genre more than the social commentary.
Yeah, and it had a different goal. Like its goal was like, let's go to war.
Yeah,
let's go to war. So my third question, and this, you guys might remember, like there was the trailer is so famous. You can find this on YouTube where the original trailer where there's no dialogue. It's imagery. There's kind of this tone that's kind of going through, and then it changes to screaming for about the last 10 seconds. Horrible imagery, and then it cuts to silence, and then it goes, in space, no one can hear you scream. Does that tagline, in space, no one can hear you scream, does that encapsulate the core fears and anxieties explored in the film? And what does it suggest about the isolation of space travel, but just isolation in general? Like, I don't know. When I watch Alien, that idea of like isolation with all the other things we've talked about, like no one can help you. You're all alone. Yeah. At times there's no sound. You just hear them breathing. Like it's weird. It's vast because you see the vastness of space, but it's also very much you feel contained and isolated in a small space, and it's terrifying.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What do you think about the tagline, and does it really connect with the story at all?
Well, it connects with the story for sure. I mean, just like you just laid it out. So there's that isolation idea. But if you go to chronology instead of geography, so in the future, instead of in space, no one can hear your voice.
Right.
Sorry. Yeah. And then we're back to it, right?
Yeah.
So, but I mean, the isolation idea, again, this is like the promo trailers and stuff. They're trying to catch your attention.
Right.
I think that it does play off the idea of isolation in space with something that's trying to kill you in the same tin can you're in.
Yeah, well, and the way the film, like, it just slowly gets more and more isolated until the end. Like, people keep dying.
Yeah.
And, you have... It's interesting that idea. And there was a very good video game. If any of you play video games, you should check out Alien Isolation, which is really based on... I think Ripley's kid is in it. It's weird. It's like her daughter's the main character, but it plays on that fear of being alone, isolated, being hunted. That just taps into something deep in our core being as humans, I think, is that idea of like we're no longer part of a tribe.
Yep.
We're all alone. There's something with us. And then I think as you build toward the end of the film, you have Ripley all alone in this little shuttle with the alien. And that's some of the scariest stuff is that scene. Like, what does she do in this situation?
Well, and some of the foreshadowing that you see, especially I'm thinking of when they brought Kane in and the idea of Ripley's care for Kane in the face of the men just wanting to study the alien. Here we have this. I mean, that this is before she has emerged as the strong female that she is. But you're already seeing that her actions, even though they're the right actions, are isolating her in comparison to the other characters. So there's even that.
She even makes a decision to try to isolate herself because she doesn't let them back on the ship, and then Ash opens the door and lets them on, breaking all their quarantine. Like if they just listened to Ripley,
none of this would have happened, and the film would have been horrible.
Yeah.
I think that's a good point though too, because then when we talk about Ash, because Ash being that avatar of the company, then it becomes like we were talking about earlier. It's not just Ripley fighting the masculine; it's her fighting the system as well. Right. So I don't know.
No, you're right. And is Ash? I have a little bit more to talk about Ash later, but I do want to talk about him some now. So we have this company that's sort of driving everything. We don't realize it though we don't fully realize it until Ripley accesses Mother, and reads the special order, which is basically everyone is expendable. And Ash is like, that's when we start to get the revelation that Ash is not human, that he's just taking these orders from the company. He's an android. I think first, in terms of a story and the storytelling moment, I think it's wildly effective. But then it's like, oh, I thought it couldn't get any worse. It can. There's another adversary that's oddly working against us, and it's all to get this aliens to make profit. And that's explored a lot more in Aliens, which I appreciate about Aliens, but that's terrifying when the people that you think would help you are really not wanting to help you.
Well, and at least the alien was the terror from the outside. It's the other.
Right.
Whereas this is terror from within.
Them. It's part of them, right? Yeah, and I think if you take Ash out of the equation, it's still a great movie, but I think adding that whole sequence and just his lack when he's revealed, and of course Parker comes in, knocks his head off with a fire extinguisher, and all that stuff happens. Harrowing stuff. But then you get the realization he doesn't really care. And he goes, you don't have a chance. Yeah. And then he has the line, but you do have my sympathies. And it's so condescending and just vile.
Well, and his white blood adds to the red and white motif that you see throughout the whole thing, where, I mean, we won't go in depth, but that is the beginning of life and the beginning of birth and all of those things. You see it throughout the film, from their food to the coloration of the doors that are white with the red. You see it in the scene where the alien erupts and there's blood everywhere.
Yeah, and it's a basically white background or white clothes.
Blood everywhere. And then you see it in this battle with Ash where his blood is this white, viscous, and I mean, you can make your connotation there. But again, you see this motif through the film again, leading us back to the idea of it's focusing in on not only cycles of oppression, but also on that feminist second wave feminism emergence. I think it's brilliant. So smart.
Yeah, and going back just to the violence of it all, there's this truly visceral, like when we see Kane's chest explode, it is so deeply like, what am I watching? Even when I watched it like last night, my wife and my eldest were in the room, and my wife looks away. My eldest is like, "This is the best movie ever." Like, and so,
the way the T-shirt stretches before it's that revelation, and it's not immediate. So it makes you want to look away, but you're also like, what's going to come out of the T-shirt that is stretching beyond stretch?
It's like, so what is good. And when you watch the scene for the first time, you've never seen the movie before, and you're watching it for the first time. There is that what is happening, and you can't catch up. Your processing can't catch up with what you're seeing, and when they were on set filming it, it was wonderful how they designed everything. They basically had, it's similar to Kevin Bacon's death in Friday the 13th.
Oh, yeah. Where it emerges out.
Yeah, well, his body is kind of at a certain angle underneath the table, John Hurt's, and so they have this cavity, and they put animal organs, pig's blood from the, and they said when the people that made it, when you walked onto set, there was this stench, just a horrific stench. Smell. And everyone, the crew all had ponchos on, like, we can't wait to, and the actors were like, what's going on? And I think there were some that didn't really know what was going to happen in terms of the effect.
Okay.
And so there's true shock on their face because it's disgusting, and they're acting but they're
good.
in the mid, and so truly one of the great horror scenes ever.
Yeah,
it's unbelievable, and I think the ash scene coupled with that, there is a terror in that that's a little bit different because it's almost like here's a human attacking me, but he's so much stronger. Like there's that realization, like he ripped almost like a handful of Ripley's hair out, just threw her easily into the wall.
Pulling her down with one hand.
Yeah, well, and then Parker can't, this huge dude can't move him. Yeah. And then, of course, he puts his hand on Parker's chest and like really hurts him. It's just truly terrifying. There's some complete moments of terror that I think puts Alien, not just the themes, the storytelling, the design, but it does go to places of absolute terror that I think just takes it to just great heights in terms of filmmaking. Yeah. It's truly amazing.
The way it's layered, though, this is more your wheelhouse than mine, but the way that it's layered builds and builds and builds. And when you think it's not going to build anymore, then you have the ash revelation. And you're just like, wait, what?
I can't comprehend what I'm doing. Yeah, and it's just everyone keeps getting killed, and you're just like, what? And, one of the great scares in the movie, we haven't even talked about this, is Dallas's death. And, you see the first time, of course, Aliens makes it so famous, the motion sensors, Aliens uses it to great effect, but it's used here in Alien. And, he's coming, the alien is coming to get Dallas. Dallas is like not quite sure where he is in these tunnels. There's so many filmmaking tricks used in this. Just one aside, the portals look like a sphincter, basically.
They do.
But what they did, what brilliantly done, is they built like a small 1 foot by 1 foot portal, and they just put it up real close to the camera. And then they close, so they didn't have to build these massive doors.
That's amazing.
And so it's just like perspective tricks. Lord of the Rings did that with the Hobbit. So it's just like where you place people on camera and how you set that up. And that was how they did that scene. But awesome. I think that scene's a wonderful scene, and it's truly it's the jump scare of the movie.
It is,
and it's so brilliantly done.
Jonesy's jump scare is pretty good too. And then
Jonesy has a few.
We're back at Friday the 13th.
What aside?
Part 2.
I was watching this with my wife and my eldest kid last night, and it was funny. When Ripley decides to go get Jonesy. I said out loud to everyone, I go, because I've never had a cat until recently, and I said, my whole life I thought Ripley was a fool. And now I have a cat, and I'm like, you are totally justified to go get that. I've hated cats my whole life. I had no desire to have one, and all of a sudden we have this little black cat that is my favorite pet I've ever had in my life. I can't believe I'm saying that. But if my cat's name's Chris. If Chris was on the Nostromo and I would go, screw it, I'm going to rescue my cat.
Well, and if it was my cat, it would have died. But here's the funny part. If it was my daughter's cats, and they're Lenny and Carl.
Oh, okay.
If it was one of those, I'd be running down the hallway to save Lenny and Carl. Okay. Just so we're clear here. I'm a farm boy, though, so you got to know my background here. So
That's so great. All right, well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to do There Can Be Only One.
There can be only one.
All right, what's the single best thing about Alien? It could be a scene, a theme, a character, a shot, the music, acting performance? Like, what is the best thing for you, Jeff,
I think it's a toss-up. I think there can be only one. I won't do two.
Now, you could give some caveats. You could say, well, here's something.
So there, without doubt, the birth of the alien out of Cain is by far one of the scariest scenes that I can even remotely think. I'm trying to think through the catalogs of all the movies, and the opening the box at the end of 7 is a very similar visceral reaction in me. And I love movies that make me feel. I don't always, they're not always the greatest movies, but those ones, when I felt that, Schindler's List at the end, same kind of reaction, even though for a different reason.
Right.
And when you saw that, you were just like I said, there was not only this, because you'd never seen it before, you had no idea there wasn't this legacy of alien movies. You're like, what is coming out of him?
Yeah, what's going on here?
But I think it's eclipsed by the commentary for me. And again, this is what I think the commentary going through and looking at it through the lens of second wave feminism and what that promoted. I think that it's that is the most beautiful thing for me about Alien is how it's so. It underpinned everything that happened, but it was so tricky.
Yeah.
I like you said, as a kid, it was just a great, scary film that put me off. And that's why I loved it. But as I got older and rewatched it, I'm like, wait, there's so much more to this.
Right.
It's that onion thing. I just kept peeling back the layers and going, wait, it does support that thesis. Wait, so good.
It's surprisingly deep.
Yeah.
It really is. When you go back and rewatch it and you start seeing these things, it's like, oh my goodness, the thought and care that was put into this by these artists to make this movie is truly amazing.
And some movies are just the writing.
Yeah.
And some movies are just the cinematography. Some are just the sets. But I think that all three,
it's all brought together.
It's a perfect trifecta.
I think when a film can do that, I think that's when you start seeing classics.
Yeah.
I think, and I think in 82, just a few years later, he does it again with Blade Runner.
Yeah.
And Blade Runner has like set design, performance, story. I mean, it just starts bringing all these things together, and you're just like, oh my goodness. I love moments in movies, and when I was younger, if it was a great moment, and truly a great moment, it would get me back in the theater, even if the rest wasn't that great. If it had a great moment, there's a really awful movie called The Chronicles of Riddick. It was a sequel to Pitch Black, and there's a sequence where they're on a planet that catches on fire when it goes in where it's daylight, and they're racing against time in Chronicles of Riddick. I think it might be one of the best action sequences of the early 2000s. I think it came out in 2001 or 2, sometime around there. And I think for 10 years, there was nothing that was as exciting as that to me. I love it. I went back and saw the movie 3 times just for that sequence. Alien isn't that, but it has several amazing sequences. And my favorite is when Ash is revealed as an android. It's there can be only one moment. It added for me even more horror, and it just took me over the edge. It took the stakes of the film to a whole new place. It added depth to the story. And when you realize, and the great stories that have drama in them, it's like, and it doesn't have to be an action or a horror film. It could be something else. It could be just a drama. It could be a romantic comedy, but it's like when you don't think, it couldn't get any worse, it does. And it's that moment in Alien where I'm just like, how is Ripley getting out of this? And I love that. I love Alien for that moment. I love it for so many things, but that's probably my favorite moment in the movie.
Oh, completely valid. I mean, but again, it's not like we are just have one or two to pick from in this film.
There's so much.
Smorgasbord.
It was so hard to pick something.
Yeah.
I just kind of it's almost like drawing something out of a hat.
You could argue for almost from the beginning to the end.
Yeah. It's amazing. Well, that about does it for Alien. There's so much more to talk about. If you want to join in the conversation online, you can go to patreon.com/livininthepast, LIVININ the past. You get an episode like this one days and days and days early. You get access to us where you can ask questions. You can help pick what the next show is, just like our patrons did. They have picked The Shining. That will be our next podcast that we'll be doing right before, it'll release right before Halloween. Wow. So we got that coming up for you. As always, thank you so much for listening. Keep your ears and eyes open because The Shining will be coming out soon. And as always, see you soon.